Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA, Episode 104 for the week ending May 25, 2018, the We're Number One edition. First, a word about our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors. Founded in 2004, Affiliated Monitors provides professional, independent integrity monitoring and ethics and compliance assessments nationally and internationally and across all industries. With its knowledge of effective ethics and compliance programs and cultures, Affiliated Monitors is respected for its work as a corporate monitor on matters ranging from multinational corporations to small and mid-sized companies and even individuals. Having served in over 600 monitorships, no one has more experience as an independent monitor than the team at Affiliated Monitors. For more information on how an independent monitor can help improve your company's ethics and compliance program, visit our sponsor, Affiliated Monitor, at www.affiliatedmonitors.com. With the Complete Compliance Handbook sitting at the top of the rankings at Amazon.com under the category of Business and Ethics, for the first week of its sales, Jay Rosen and myself take a look at some of the top compliance stories over the past week. May 25, 2018, GDPR has gone live. Are you ready? We review the highlights, our highlights from Compliance Week 2018, which recently concluded. The SFO brings new charges in the Unaoil matter, and the DOJ brings new charges in the Rolls Royce case. We consider Matt Kelly's look at the new flattening of organizations and what that might mean for compliance. We consider that Pemex now requires its contractors to have compliance programs. We take a look at the use of behavioral science in compliance through an article by Ben DiPietro in the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Journal, and then take a look at an article which reviews the now 15-month history of the evaluation of corporate compliance programs. We conclude by talking about the Rockets and Celtics, both up 3-2, going to the away team's gymnasium for a critical Game 6 and what it may mean. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist and the author of the Complete Compliance Handbook. And I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA, Episode 104 for the week ending May 25, 2018, the We're Number One edition. As always, I'm joined by Mr. Monitors himself, Jay Rosen, and we will bring you some of the week's top ethics and compliance stories. So, Jay, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. It was great seeing you only for a little bit in D.C., so we had some time together, and I look forward to running through the week's big events on ethics and compliance in FCPA. And number one with a bullet, it was publication day for the Complete Compliance Handbook written by our compliance evangelist himself, Tom Fox. And we have some very nice words and reviews that came from Dick Casson at the FCPA blog, Matt Kelly at Radical Compliance, and Mike Volkov. And I'll just read a couple blurbs, but we hope everyone will have an opportunity to look at your work. Basically, this is over 500 pages of things that you've been talking about over the last several years, and chief amongst it is a step-by-step guide to design, creation, implementation, or enhancement of your compliance program. You start off with a chapter on 31 days to better compliance program. And then after that, you devote individual sections to the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program. And, the hope of this is that for compliance practitioners, whether you've been in the business for a while or whether you're just starting out, that this will be a nuts and bolts guide that you will refer to quite often. And Matt also did a really nice podcast with you that's about 9 minutes long. And one of the points that you made that I really enjoyed is Matt was asking you about, how you're able to relate different political things, sports things, looking at the Michael Cohen case, and how you can relate those back to ethics and compliance. And you told Matt, for me, at the end of the day, as much as compliance is a business process, it's about the people. Once you realize compliance is about people, you'll see examples about people everywhere. So, Tom, congratulations on your book, and anything else you'd like to add?
So I'm really happy with the results, Jay. I am number one in new releases in business ethics for Amazon.com, so very gratified by that. Got to sign a bunch of copies at Compliance Week for persons who purchase the book. I can still autograph a copy for you if you'd like. It's available through my website. Otherwise, go to Amazon.com. But it was really a kind of a journey of learning for me, Jay, and I spent 13 months writing it. I did a lot of research, read as much as I could, and got to talk to some of the top compliance and ethics practitioners and a lot of other folks around who have ideas, thoughts, products, and services all in the compliance space. So it was a great journey, and really gratified that I can finally get it published and have it available. So thank you for the kind words.
You're welcome. So besides being number one on the Amazon list today is also May 25th, 2018. And as our colleague Jonathan Armstrong has been talking about for the last year and a half, GDP is live. And have you heard anything hit in the news, Tom, or what are your thoughts on how people should be preparing and what they should have done by day one?
Well, Jay, I don't know what your experience has been over the past 48 hours, but I think I've received about 3 million emails asking me to either opt in or telling me that by reading this email, I've agreed to a new data privacy policy by someone I'm on an email list from. So my hope is that the day after Memorial Day, Tuesday, May 29, that will end. Nevertheless, I think lots of companies obviously are waking up to this law. You're right about Jonathan's been talking about it for 18 months. What I guess my biggest concern, Jay, is that the regulators will be inflexible on this, and also that they will aggressively pursue U.S. companies. That I think they've got several very large U.S. companies in their sights: Google, Amazon, Facebook, and then they view this as maybe payback for the U.S. going after European banks for violating Iranian sanctions over the past 10 years or so, and the other large fines that the U.S. has put on international banks. And of course, we've got a president who's threatening secondary sanctions on European commercial entities over this his cancellation of the Iranian treaty. So this is a very powerful set of regulations, and lots of different ways companies could stumble. Facebook is currently under investigation for their Cambridge Analytica imbroglio, and the regulators may take a very dim view of people who don't follow the law going forward. There's a couple of other wrinkles that are not available under U.S. data privacy law, which are class actions. So potentially we could start to see lots of class actions from individuals who file subject access requests and rights to be forgotten letters. And U.S. companies do not respond on a timely basis. They do what they do here in the United States, which is either say nothing or say as absolute little as possible. And of course, data breaches. Now they have to report data breach within 72 hours to an appropriate regulator in the United Kingdom. You still do not have to report in the U.S., but imagine the situation, Jay, of a multinational large company, a multi-billion-dollar Fortune 100, 500, or 5 company has a data breach, reports in Europe, but doesn't report in the United States, and the outcry over that. So lots to still digest. Jonathan, our colleague Jonathan Armstrong, sent me today a new UK data protection, data privacy law, which they've passed in the wake of Brexit, as they will no longer be part of the EU going forward. So there'll be yet another regulatory scheme because of the Brexit. So we put a lot of resources in today's podcast show notes. I had a summary blog post today. I've got an extensive white paper that's available on Corporate Compliance Insights. And over the past several months, Jonathan Armstrong and I have done a podcast series of Countdown to GDPR, and we've got all of those episodes listed on the show notes. So take a look. If you haven't really looked at this yet, or you need to start looking at it, you need to start looking at this now, but there's lots of resources. Quarterly Compliance is literally one of the best resources across the globe on this issue. They got a ton and a half of stuff on their website. They have something called the GDPR Navigator. They've got some great frequently asked questions that I rely on for answers. So lots of resources available to you. And I guess my last suggestion would be call Jonathan Armstrong, get him on retainer now.
I would second that one. And Tom, as I inferred at the beginning of the podcast, we were together at Compliance Week in DC. Unfortunately, I had to jump out a little bit early to help my family move. But what are your thoughts on the whole conference? Then I'll chime in with some bits as well.
So it's really interesting, Jay. Every conference has its own personality, its own feel. It's really difficult to say one is better than another. Certainly, some presentations stand out over the years, but I thought this conference was just outstanding in every way. The opening or Sunday, we had a couple of workshops. You attended one that was led by Mary Shirley, and we had a great cocktail hour setting off the tone for Sunday. Lots of people showed up. Lots of vendors were showing during the cocktail hour. So typically you don't get to visit with vendors. So I thought that was great. And then right out of the box Monday, we had Rod Rosenstein, Deputy Attorney General, with his entourage. But, he gave a great speech. And what did he do after he had a speech? Well, he just tooled on over to the White House for a short little meeting. You never would have known it watching him. But he had some great words for the compliance profession, the compliance practitioner, and the compliance programs around corporate culture and the robustness and the need for a robust compliance program, the anti-piling on statute. We had some great presentations Monday. I got to have a book signing, so that was a big deal for me. The cocktail party was great. Closing keynote on Monday afternoon where we had the top minds, Compliance Week's top minds. Awardees were there. Started off again Tuesday. Louis Sapperman and I had a great presentation on various hallmarks and frameworks, for compliance programs. I had a panel, chaired another panel on ERM risk management. Katie Lickup and Tony Toko. The presentations continued into Wednesday morning. I really enjoyed some of the presentations. Scott Lane led a great panel on really cutting edge compliance programs. So lots of good stuff, lots of great panels, some new vendors that I had not seen. Always good to have some new vendors. We had some from outside the traditional anti-corruption compliance space, so I thought that always brings in some new ideas. And some of the usual suspects were there. Certainly Navex, Thomson Reuters, Red Flag Group, several others in the main hall. So I really enjoyed it. Really thought it was excellent. Got to participate in some great panels. Got to witness some great panels. The end of the second day was probably the most poignant for me, Jay, when Marie Sonnen this was her last conference. She's moving on, going in-house with BAE. And the new editor-in-chief of Compliance Week, Dave Lefort, presented her with a huge bouquet of roses and, in what I thought was a fabulous gesture, a lifetime pass to Compliance Week. So sad to see Maria go, but she's been great. And once again, a great conference. The staff took care of everything. I thought it was seamless. The electronic check-in was great. I lost, or rather misplaced, my badge at one point. And in a panic, I said, "Oh, well, here, hit the, enter your name and hit the reprint badge button." So they were obviously ready for somebody like me. Got a very cool shirt, got a very cool umbrella. So it was just kind of my thoughts. And once again, great conversations in those rooms, around those rooms, on the breaks. lots of people talking about compliance, lots of good and new ideas. I know you were talking to a lot of people. We got to have a great cigar at Shelley's Cigar Bar with Jim Moore. Always great to catch up with Jim. Got to catch up with Ren McEachern. Had some words with Richard Bestrong. So it was a great, kind of the fraternity got back together.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. A couple other panels that I thought were really useful. One was called You Can't Delegate Ethics, and that was moderated by Carrie Penman from Navix. And on the panel were Kelly Clark, Chief Ethics Officer for the Holland American Group. They own several different cruise ship lines. Kathleen Flanagan, President and CEO of ABT Associates, and Jeffrey Colleen, Chief Compliance Officer from Bumblebee Seafoods. And another session that I really liked was called Best Practices, Ensuring Your Compliance Chain is Built to Last. And that was by Amy Barnard-Bond and Patrick Day, who's a Director of Compliance and Policy at GSK. And, what they really talked about was, how do you actually lead change, and how do you get people to stop doing things the old way and get them to do new things in the way that needs to be done going forward from an ethics and compliance perspective. So both Amy and Patrick were really passionate about their presentation. And the last one I want to note was best practices session and practical tools for program assessments. And this was led by Ellen Hunt, who's the SVP Audit, Ethics and Compliance at AARP, and Barbara Petiti, Ethics and Compliance Officer for Alstom. So, to echo your sentiments there are just so many great thought leaders, and to have everybody there in the same place. And one other part I liked about this conference is that, you have a keynote in the morning, you break up, you do some sessions, but you come back together as a whole. So I think there's that nice rhythm that you go out on your tracks and then you come back together and you can bring everything back home. So next thing we have is the SFO is been busy again. And on Tuesday, they brought more charges against two individuals who are already part of the Unaoil investigation. Here comes some butchered names: Basile A. Jarrah and Ziad Akle. They were both charged with conspiracy to give corrupt payments. The payments were intended to secure the award of a contract worth $733 million to Leighton Contractors Singapore. The contract for a project was to build 2 oil pipelines in Iraq. So once again, Unaoil proves fruitful, and the SFO is pursuing these matters as we speak. Matt Kelly, and we also have another article of that we'll refer to in our show notes from Mara Lima Stein over at the Wall Street Journal. Matt Kelly's been thinking about compliance while cutting middle market management, and he had a piece that I'm teeing you up for. So what was Matt saying, Tom?
So if you don't read Radical Compliance, the minute you finish with this podcast, I hope you go to his site, because Matt Kelly always has some great stuff, and he does lots of research and looks at numbers and looks at things that are not really legal or lawyer focused, as would be befitting from a business journalist. And he wrote a really interesting piece this week entitled "Compliance While Cutting Middle Management," and he teed it up by looking at starting with Elon Musk's attempts to, or not attempts, but his flattening of his management team by cutting out a middle management row. And Matt asked, what does that business issue mean for compliance? And he had several different points. The first is that culture is much more important when you cut out middle managers who are overseeing and really emphasizing and enforcing culture to where it's lower level folks. They really need to understand the culture of our companies to do business ethically and in compliance. It couples with operationalization of compliance as well. He then notes that it can actually make it more difficult to speak up and have a speak up culture because you don't know when or who to talk to, that makes reporting lines even more critical. Interestingly, he says that when you move, and I would have to agree with this, that when you move compliance really into the front lines, you have to have robust internal controls, that those are the guardrails which keep everybody in the middle of the road, or at least from veering off the road completely. So a really interesting series of questions to think about. I had thought about that really from a different perspective, Jay, and starting in 2014 when the price of oil dropped dramatically and energy companies really had to cut back because of the slump in energy prices. But this is a different, although his title is Cutting Middle Management, it's really not a layoff cut, Jay. It's more of a different management strategy or management style by flattening your organization by getting rid of middle management. So as management theories go in and out of vogue, I think compliance programs need to have the flexibility and the robustness to respond to that. And it was really interesting the way Matt teed that up with the Elon Musk and Tesla situation and the moves that Musk is making around flattening his management and thinking about what does it really mean for compliance. Jay, now we had literally in breaking news today, Dick Casson told us that the Department of Justice has charged 2 more in the Rolls Royce bribery case. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. So the 2 people who have been charged, one of them is Arzat Maritrosian, 62, a citizen of Armenia, who was formerly served as the country's ambassador to China, and Vitaly Leshkov, 50, a Russian citizen. And they both faced 1 count of conspiracy to launder money and 10 counts of money laundering. They're both believed to be living outside the U.S. Thursday's superseding indictment included FCPA charges also against Petros Kontoguris, a Greek citizen living in Turkey. And basically what happened was in January of 2017, Rolls-Royce paid a U.S. criminal fine of $170 million as part of the $800 million global settlement. At that time, DOJ charged Rolls-Royce with a conspiracy to violate the FCPA, and the company entered into a deferred prosecution agreement. Thursday's charges against the 3 involved bribes to a Kazakh official to win $145 million contract to supply equipment and services for a gas pipeline. So this also involves a U.S. entity. The contract was won by Rolls-Royce Energy Systems, a Columbus, Ohio subsidiary for Rolls-Royce. So unfortunately, they appear to be back in the news and are taking their place as recidivists. Next up, we have... go ahead. Did you want to say something, Tom?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I was going to say next up is oil services company that is always near and dear to our heart. What is happening at Pemex?
So, Jay, Pemex now requires compliance programs for contractors. And this is obviously a really significant development for the country of Mexico, for North and South America, and compliance programs generally. And companies now have to have a compliance program in place, and you can't do business with Pemex without a compliance program. So it really tied in, though, Jay, to something that Louis Sapperman said in our presentation at Compliance Week. And he said that 5 years ago, having a compliance program, even a best practices compliance program, was a real market differentiator. It really made you stand out from your competitors in the market. Well, now having a compliance program is table stakes. You've got to have a compliance program just to get into the game. And if you want to do business with literally the only oil company in Mexico, this is what it's going to require. So most U.S. companies are going to have these programs in place because they are subject to the FCPA. But now we've got the contractor, rather the owner, the contractor here, Pemex, requiring that of its contractors. or the company. So I think this is really what we've seen, that the business solution to legal problem of corruption and bribery is compliance. And this is one more example of the businesses here at Pemex putting in place a solution, the requirement for every company to have a best practices or at least a compliance program. So, and they will have the right to audit this, have a right to look at it, consider the robustness of it. So I thought a pretty important change in policy by Pemex. So if you do business in Mexico, if you want to do business in Mexico, you're going to have a compliance program in place.
Yeah, and this is really, I think, noteworthy because these are things that you've been speaking about for a long time, and other commentators too, by saying that risk is really there with your third-party competitors. And not only do you need to hold them accountable to your ethics and compliance program, but you also need to have audit rights. And one of your favorite things, borrowed from President Reagan, you also trust, but you have to verify, and this really gives you the teeth to do so.
So Jay, we had one last article, which was a blog post on the SCCE blog by Sasha Matuzak, and she, I thought, in a very interesting post, took a look at the evaluation of corporate compliance programs, which was released in February 2017, and taking a look at it from really 1 year's perspective. And I thought it was a very good review, summary of the evaluation. And it really drove home, Jay, how important the evaluation has become for literally every company, every compliance practitioner, and every compliance program, because it lays out a way for you to think through your program. Wei Chin has said it's not a checklist, and I agree with her wholeheartedly. But it's also it's really important for you to use as a self-assessment for your own program, because these are questions the Department of Justice would ask if you were in front of them in an enforcement action. So when Wei Chin says, "I hope it gets people to think about their program," I think it's done exactly that. And I applauded Andrew Wiseman, who released it last year. And I certainly applaud it. Continued use today. I incorporated it into my book because I thought it was so important. But most importantly, it gave us some real insight into how the DOJ is thinking on best practices compliance programs.
So I'd like to hit you with an unprepared question. When we did see Wei speak at the conference and she was on that panel, somebody asked her, if you were going to be putting together an ethics and compliance organization within your company, who would you have on that list? And she mentioned that you might want to have technologists, you might want to have HR people, you might want to have people from many different parts of the organization, but she was less than sanguine about having somebody from the legal ops on that team. Your thoughts on her comments?
Well, actually, Jay, that ties into one of our articles I wanted to raise with you, which is Ben DiPietro reported in the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Journal about nudging in compliance. And so before I answer that question, why don't you tell us what nudging in compliance is?
Sure. So this is a concept. First of all, Ben starts speaking with some folks from Eli Lilly, and basically they're looking at how to influence people who make ethics and compliance decisions by, quote, nudging them, unquote, or by using choice architecture, which is a way to promote ethical behavior among employees. Nudges are one of these ways businesses are deploying behavioral ethics to reaffirm values and keep employees focused. So the way I would kind of look at it is almost like a just-in-time ethical message. If you are getting ready, you're either going to a foreign country or coming back, and it's time to do your TEE, you might get a little nudge saying, when doing your expense report, remember to keep things in the proper category. So the idea is to keep a topic in front of as many people as they can. And they know from research that when people have this kind of messaging in front of them, they're more likely to make the right decisions.
So now let me see if I can use that intro to answer your question, Jay, which is the thing I got out of the article was nudging is a part of behavioral science, and it's using behavioral science to impact employees or patients, or people's behavior. And Wei Chen said I would have a behavioral scientist on, and she had several other disciplines. She said I'd have a data scientist. I'd certainly have some IT people. I'd have some HR focused people. I'd have some people who knew how to read a spreadsheet. You're right. She said I would not have a lawyer, but and I might disagree with that. Certainly legal training is helpful, but it really speaks to the much broader remit of compliance now and what goes into a best practices compliance program. I think she even said I'd have a marketing or a comms person. And that's certainly a part of compliance. How do you communicate with your customers who are your employees? How do you data mine the data that's in your company to get insights around your compliance program? What does all of that mean? How can you use some of the things that Ben wrote about here within the compliance space? Does behavioral science really help people do business more ethically and in compliance? So when she answered that question, I think many people's reaction was similar to the question you posed to me, Jay, a little bit, if not perplexed, questioning of why she would have that list of people. But I think Ben's article really points, and your recitation of it really points to where compliance is going and why it is going in that direction, because it really ties even back to the thing you cited in my interview with Matt Kelly. Why do I bring in obituaries, sports stories, rock and roll albums, concerts, Sherlock Holmes, King Arthur? Why do I bring all of those into my blog? It's because compliance at the end of the day is about people. And I think that's what Wei Chen was saying in a very different format. And I think that's what Ben is saying, that it's not about a law, not the FCPA. It is about a business process, but that process is impacting people. So I really found your question tied really directly into what Ben reported on and where we may see several iterations of compliance go down the road, Jay.
Well, there certainly is a synchronicity, and now we have a potential Boston-Houston matchup if things go well. What are your thoughts on the Rockets' chance of beating Golden State?
Well, as I was coming to the studio to record today's podcast, I heard the breaking news that Chris Paul is out for Game 6. So he's obviously injured his hamstring that they don't think they can fix in a couple of days. And I think it'll be even more difficult to beat Golden State in Oakland without Chris Paul. That means probably a Game 7. But the Rockets certainly did themselves proud last night. They took the lead 3-2, going back out to California, potentially can close it out, although I will say it may be much tougher now without Mr. Paul joining them. But, the Celtics are up 3-2 heading to Cleveland. I think we're going to 7 games in both conference finals. I don't know what your thoughts might be, but Houston certainly it's been a while, I guess 35 years since we met up with the Celtics the last time and got our tails handed to us. But we did meet the Boston Red Sox in the AL playoffs last year. And as I recall, the tables were somewhat turned in Houston's favor. So we may have something to talk about going forward.
Well, it's always nice when we have a little Boston-Houston action. So let's see how that goes. Also, yesterday we released our latest Everything Compliance podcast with Mike Volkov, Matt Kelly, Jonathan Armstrong, Tom Fox, and myself. And our topic, which was very much in the news a couple of weeks ago, was what's happening with Mr. Cohen and all the money that's flowing into his essential consulting bank account. Anything? How's the podcast doing, Tom? Do we have any initial numbers?
So I don't have any initial numbers. Usually takes a couple of days to get some, but the topic has really drawn a lot of interest. So I think we're going to find a lot of people enjoying that podcast, which, Jay, we did on a Q&A rather than a topical basis as we normally do, where everybody takes one topic. But lots of going on there. It's been a little bit quiet for the past couple of days. So when you have more than 48 hours with no news, it's kind of interesting in the Trump news cycle. I guess he had some other things going on. But lots to talk about. So got anything upcoming from Affiliated Monitors or the J. Rosen travels?
Well, we know next week, actually the first week in June, we're going to start a new series about suspension and debarment. And one of our colleagues, Rod Grandin from DC, formerly a suspension and debarment officer at the United States Air Force, will be commencing a 5-part podcast with you. So that will drop not next week, but the week after Memorial Day. So I think this is something that a lot of people really could get some use out of. It's not a really well discussed subject, and Rod is one of the people who really knows how the subject matter works. So I encourage you to look out for that. And that's about it. The Rosens are unpacking boxes and enjoying their new house. And as you know, Rebecca would like to be unpacked in 48 hours. So we were on that time schedule, and she is cracking the whip.
Well, good to know. Well, you want to take us home from the new digs?
Sure. So on behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rosen, we'd like to thank you for listening to This Week in FCPA, episode number 104, the We're Number One episode. Thank you for joining us and giving a listen to all things compliance and ethics and FCPA. And we hope you have a safe and wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you have listened to this episode on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and help get the word out about the only compliance and ethics weekly wrap-up. Also, if you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. You can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. Thanks for listening to this episode, and I hope you'll join us again next week, where we talk about all of the week's top compliance and ethics stories. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.